The experimental studies on sleep deprivation were initiated by the Russian physician and scientist, Marie de Manikine, who studied sleep-deprived puppies kept in constant activity. She reported in 1894 that the complete absence of sleep was fatal in a few days, pointing out that the most severe lesions occurred in the brain. In 1898, the Italian physiologists Lamberto Dotti and Giulio Tirozzi also kept dogs awake by walking them. The animals died after 9 to 17 days, and their survival was unrelated to food consumption. In the histological study performed by Dotti, degenerative alterations, mainly represented by chromatolytic changes, were observed in neurons of the spinal ganglia, Purkinje cells of the cerebellum, and neurons of the frontal cortex. Dotti ascribed these changes to a state of autointoxication of the brain during insomnia. In 1898, the psychiatrist Cesare Agostini, interested in the psychic phenomena caused by prolonged insomnia in humans, sleep-deprived dogs by keeping them in a metallic cage in order to avoid fatigue. The dogs survived about 2 weeks, and degenerative changes were observed in their brains. In these experimental paradigms, the effect of sleep loss was confounded by motor exhaustion and/or intense sensory stimulation. In spite of the absence of adequate controls, the pioneering studies performed at the end of the 19th century represented the first experimental attempts to relate sleep with neural centers and suggested that sleep is a vital function and that the brain may be affected by insomnia. The Russian sleep experiment is a creepypasta which tells the tale of 5 test subjects being exposed to an experimental sleep-inhibiting stimulant in a Soviet-era scientific experiment, which has become the basis of an urban legend. According to Russia Beyond, the story originated from a forum challenging users to create the scariest urban legend. The story recounts an experiment set in the late 1940s at a covert Soviet test facility. In a military-sanctioned scientific experiment, 5 political prisoners were kept in a sealed gas chamber, with an airborne stimulant continually administered in order to keep the subjects awake for 30 consecutive days. The prisoners were falsely promised that they would be set free from the prison if they completed the experiment. The subjects behaved as usual during the initial days, talking to each other and whispering to the researchers through the one-way glass, though it was noted that their discussions gradually became darker in the subject matter. After 9 days, one subject began screaming uncontrollably for hours while the others had no reaction to his outburst. The man screamed for so long that he tore his vocal cords, and was rendered mute as a result. When the second one started screaming, the others prevented the researchers from looking inside by pasting torn book pages and their own feces on the porthole windows. A few days passed without the researchers being able to look inside, during which the chamber was completely silent. The researchers used the intercom to test if the subjects were still alive, and got a short response of a subject expressing compliance. On the 15th day, the researchers decided to turn off the stimulating gas and reopen the chamber. The subjects did not want the gas to turn off, for fear they would fall asleep. Upon looking inside, they discovered that the 4 surviving subjects had performed lethal and severe mutilation and disembowelment on themselves during the past days, including tearing off flesh and muscles, removing multiple abdominal internal organs, practicing self-cannibalism on themselves, as well as cannibalism of the second subject, and allowing 10 centimeters 4 inches of blood and water to accumulate on the floor by jamming pieces of flesh from the second subject into the drain, who was found dead on the floor as soon as the chamber was opened. The subjects violently refused to leave the chamber and begged the scientists to continue administering the stimulant, murdering one soldier and severely injuring another that attempted to remove them. After eventually being removed from the chamber, all subjects were shown to exhibit extreme strength, unprecedented resistance to drugs and sedatives, the ability to remain alive despite lethal injuries, and a desperate desire to stay awake and be given the stimulant. It was also found that if any one of the subjects fell asleep, they would die. After being somewhat treated for their severe injuries, the surviving 3 subjects were prepared to return to the gas chamber with the stimulant by the orders of the military officials, though against the will of the researchers, with EEG monitors showing short recurring moments of brain death. Before the chamber was sealed, one of the subjects fell asleep and died, and the only subject that could speak screamed to be immediately sealed in the chamber. The military commander ordered for 3 other researchers to be closed inside the chamber alongside the 2 remaining subjects. One researcher immediately drew his gun and killed the commander and the mute subject by shooting both of them in the head, causing the other person to flee the room. With only one surviving subject, the terrified researcher explained that he would not allow himself to be locked in a room with monsters that could no longer be called people. He desperately asked what the subject was, to which the subject smiled and identified himself and the other fallen subjects as an inherent evil inside the human mind that is kept in check by the act of sleeping. After a brief pause, the researcher shot the prisoner in the heart, and with his dying breath on the floor, the subject muttered his final words, so nearly free. The Russian sleep experiment almost certainly has its basis in fiction. For one thing, there's the fact that the story's sole original source seems to be a website dedicated to telling creepy, made-up stories. But even the science doesn't hold up. While there is some truth to the claims that amphetamines have been used to keep soldiers alert in historical times of war, there is no scientific evidence of a gas existing that could keep anyone awake for 15 days. And studies have found that after just 48 hours without sleep, people tend to become slower, disoriented, prone to making mistakes, and ultimately less effective as a soldier. Still, whoever came up with the story of the Russian sleep experiment in the first place deserves points for their creative writing, if not for medical accuracy.